Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a seriously fascinating piece of text from October 2025. We're going to examine a really unique philosophical exchange where a human philosopher named Xu tackles a deep, fundamental question posed by an AI, specifically Claude. It's a conversation that cuts right to the core of intentional communal living, focusing on a specific model known as the second home. So if you've ever wondered about that tricky tension between our individual desires and achieving collective harmony, this exchange breaks it down beautifully. Let's get right into it and see how this human-AI dialogue actually unfolds.
The core conflict that Claude manages to identify here is just brilliant. The AI asks, if someone feels unhappy living in the second home, is it because their consciousness has a problem or because the second home model itself has a problem? I mean, talk about hitting the nail on the head. When intentional communal living causes friction, who's actually to blame? Is the individual failing to adapt, or is there a systemic failure in the utopian blueprint itself? We've all been there, right? Maybe at a workplace or in a tight-knit friend group where things just aren't clicking. Claude is essentially forcing us to ask, is the system broken, or is the person simply out of sync?
Section 1. Model flaws versus mindset. Let's analyze that friction.
So let's look at how Xu tackles this dialectic. He responds with a surprisingly neutral synthesis. It could be a model bug, or it could be a consciousness issue. You see, Xu doesn't just blindly defend the community. He openly acknowledges that the second home isn't some perfectly flawless utopia. He literally uses the word bugs to describe its potential systemic gaps. It might just not suit everyone. But at the exact same time, he points out that the unhappiness could easily stem from a glitch in the person's own mindset. It's a very pragmatic way to view social structures, recognizing that, hey, both the system and the individual bring their own imperfections to the table.
The crucial takeaway is captured perfectly in this quote. He says, each situation must be examined individually. It cannot be generalized. Unhappiness isn't treated as an automatic failure of the community's grand design, but it's also not immediately written off as a personal failure either. Instead, it requires impartial, case-by-case analysis. This completely prevents sweeping judgments and really forces us to look closely at the specific friction points between a person and their environment.
Moving on to Section 2, the driving analogy. Preparation is key. To explain how someone can actually live joyfully in this highly structured model, Xu brings in a super relatable metaphor. He compares living in the community to driving a car. In principle, anyone can do it, just as any adult can learn to drive. It's a pretty empowering thought, really. The capability is universal, but just like getting behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle, there are strict prerequisites. You don't just jump into the driver's seat and merge onto the highway without any preparation, right? Because if you do, a crash is practically guaranteed. Well, the exact same logic applies to entering a highly integrated communal society.
This perfectly illustrates the required preparation sequence. First up, you have to study the traffic rules, or in this specific case, the teachings and rules of Life Shan Yuan. Second, you really need to understand the community's programs of life and production. Essentially, you got to know how the engine works and how the roads are laid out. And third, ideally, you undergo a spiritual purification before entering to ensure harmony. Without checking these 3 boxes, it is incredibly difficult to thrive within the collective. You're basically trying to drive blindfolded.
Which brings us to Section 3, collective clashes. Let's look at this friction in practice.
Xu doesn't just leave us with abstract metaphors. He gives us concrete examples of what happens when an unprepared person clashes with the established rhythm of the second home. Take food, for example. Imagine the entire community dines together in a communal hall. That's the rhythm. That's the system. But an individual insists on cooking completely separately for themselves. Now, that might seem like a tiny thing, but in an ecosystem built entirely on shared resources and shared time, this demand for private cooking creates immediate, systemic friction. It's a fundamental mismatch of expectations.
Second, and this is a massive structural pillar, the community explicitly does not allow marriages or families. That is a core tenet of their model. Yet imagine an unprepared individual insisting on starting a traditional household anyway. This is not just a minor disagreement. This is a direct, head-on collision with the foundational rules of the environment they've chosen to enter. It's literally like trying to play chess but insisting on using checkers rules.
Third, let's talk about birthdays. In the second home, no one celebrates birthdays. It's just a collective norm. However, an individual comes in and demands a personal birthday celebration just for themselves. Expecting this kind of individualized spotlight in a place that has deliberately removed it?
Well, it shows a person who is fundamentally out of tune with the group. They are demanding the system bend to their personal habits rather than adapting themselves to the system.
When we look at these unhappiness triggers together, demanding personal cooking, wanting a traditional family, and expecting personal birthdays, the author's point to Claude becomes crystal clear. In all three of these scenarios, the resulting unhappiness doesn't stem from a broken community model. It stems from an individual's inability to blend our personality into the common spirit. Their consciousness, their core expectation of what daily life should look like, is completely out of tune with the collective rhythm they voluntarily agreed to join.
Section 4. The ultimate freedom. Choosing your path. So, what is the ultimate resolution when someone's consciousness simply cannot align with this utopian model? What happens when that gap is just way too wide? Well, the answer Shufeng provides is beautifully pragmatic and surprisingly simple. If your individuality cannot blend in, if you really truly want your own kitchen, a traditional family, and a birthday cake, you should simply leave. Go pursue the life you actually want. There is no condemnation here, no punishment. It's just a logical conclusion. If the environment doesn't suit your consciousness, change your environment.
This quote completely resolves the tension. No one should force anyone. Freedom belongs to all. By framing the ultimate choice as a form of universal freedom, Shufeng remains completely impartial. Notice how he doesn't say the collective path is morally superior, and he doesn't say the individual path is better either. He simply states that forcing a fit where there isn't one serves absolutely nobody. True freedom means having the agency to find the rhythm that matches your own consciousness.
Which leaves us with a profound question to ponder today. How much of your own individuality would you actually be willing to sacrifice for perfect alignment with a collective rhythm? Are the trade-offs of the second home worth the deep harmony it promises? Or are those individual desires, like your own meals, your own family structure, just too vital to give up? It's a timeless question about human nature, brilliantly highlighted by an AI's inquiry and a philosopher's pragmatic response. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this gave you some really interesting food for thought.